Morning, everyone. We will give it a few minutes for people to get into the session, and then we will get started. We'll give it another minute or so. All right. Well, that probably wasn't a full minute, but I'm always impatient, so I can never wait the full minute for people to get this thing started. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our presentation. Before we get started, just a note: this is a session for domestic students. We're going to have a similar session for international students tomorrow. So, if you're an international student who's joining us for this, you may find tomorrow's session to be more relevant. The sessions are being recorded, so if for whatever reason you aren't able to make tomorrow's session and you're an international student, we will record it, and the admissions office will make it available for everybody to participate. So just to quickly introduce ourselves, my name is Michael Silvernail. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid. I've been here for a little over 3 years and at Harvard for about 22. And so Nate, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Sinead Mulu, and I'm the Assistant Director of Financial Aid, and I've been here at Harvard Chan for about 8 years.
And Salam.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little sick. My name is Salam. I am the Financial Aid Coordinator in the Office of Financial Aid. I've been here for a little bit over a year. So if you have emailed or plan to email our office, you're probably going to be hearing from me. And we're happy you guys have joined.
So thank you all for joining us. Sinead and Salam are going to go off camera while we do a presentation. Just a quick note that if you do have questions as we go along, you can ask those questions using the Q&A panel on the Zoom session. Some of the questions we will answer as we go along. Other questions we may both answer and then also address again if we think it's of general interest after we do the quick presentation. But if you do have any questions as you go along, please feel free to ask them there. However, just be aware, if they're very specific questions that you think are unique to yourself, you may want to reach out to us independently. We may not have time to address questions, and you really don't want to bring up individual circumstances which are very unique to yourself. But if you think they're of general interest, please feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A panel. All right, so let's get started. So first, as an FYI, in order to be considered for financial aid, you have to complete a financial aid application. Now, most but not all programs are eligible to be considered for grants and scholarships. As you can see on this slide, the programs that are eligible include the MPH programs, the SM programs, the DRPH program, MPH in epidemiology, MPH Gen. All of those programs are eligible. However, there are some programs that do not qualify to be considered for scholarships and grants, and those include the Masters in Healthcare Management and the summer-only or summer-focused SM 42.5 and MPH 45 programs. So if you're in the summer-only or summer-focused programs, there's not the opportunity to apply for scholarship aid. But for all other programs, you do have that opportunity. Now, for the PhD programs, the PhD program is funded, but you don't have to do a financial aid application through our office. Financial aid is a sort of integral part of the admissions process for the PhD program, and you would be independently notified of that financial aid and that financial aid options. But for all the master's programs, along with the DRPH program, you do have to complete the financial aid application. In addition to the application for funding and assistance from our office, then there's also federal aid opportunities. And again, most but not all programs are eligible for federal financial aid. Now, when we talk about federal financial aid, we're talking about loan eligibility because unfortunately, there's no federal grants for master's students, unlike undergraduate students. But if you're in the MPH 42 MPH programs, the SM programs, MPH Generalist program, or the DRPH program, you are eligible for federal loans. If you are in the Master's in Healthcare Management, or again, the summer only or summer focused, or the MPH EPI program, however, unfortunately, you're not eligible to borrow federal loans or receive federal work study. Now, we mentioned that most programs do qualify to apply for financial aid, but it's not an automatic process. You do have to complete an application. And the way the application process works is in sort of early to mid-December, you're going to receive an email from our office telling you the application is available. And the deadline is going to be January 8th. Now, bear in mind, you do have to have a complete SOFAS application first. So do make sure you complete your actual application for admission, because in order for you to apply for financial aid, you have to have applied for admission first. And also be aware, to be considered for any financial aid, merit or need, you do need to complete that financial aid application. There's no process for which you're automatically considered for funding. So if you do not complete that financial aid application, you're not going to be considered for scholarship assistance. So it's extremely important that you apply by that January 8th deadline. And as you can note, of course, you're not going to know if you've been admitted by the time the January 8th deadline comes around. You're going to have to apply before you know if you've been admitted, but unfortunately, that's the only way we can proceed, because we try to release financial aid decisions at the same time we release admissions decisions. So please do make sure you meet that January 8th deadline. We also encourage you to get the FAFSA filed, ideally by January 8th, but by no later than January 15th. The FAFSA is not part of the scholarship consideration process, but it is necessary for us to give you information about your federal aid eligibility. So do make sure you also file your FAFSA if you have any interest in either federal loans or federal work study. One important part of the consideration process, obviously, is how much it's going to cost you to attend. Now, we do not have the tuition fees figures available yet for next year. So what we're showing you here is the annual cost of attendance for the current year. One thing that can occasionally be a little confusing for people is this is the annual cost of attendance, which means if you're in a program that's more than 1 year in length, you're going to have more than 1 year's of costs. So for example, in the MPH 65 program or the SM60 or SM80, you're going to have for the 65 or the 60 an additional semester worth of costs. If you're in the SM80 program, you're going to have an additional year's worth of the cost. So when you're looking at these costs, where you look at, say, for example, the MPH 45 as having tuition fees around $77,000 versus if you look at the MPH 65, it's $68,000. That's only for 1 year. So you have another half of that amount for the second year for the MPH 65 program. We also have estimated living expenses below. Obviously, those aren't direct expenses that you're paying to us, but you are going to have expenses that you're going to incur just for paying for rent and food, et cetera. So bear that in mind. And when we're looking at that, here is sort of a breakdown of how that living expense roughly we estimate. So we look at housing, and we do an estimate based upon the cost of housing in Shattuck Hall, which is an on-campus living opportunity, Vanderbilt Hall, and then the apartments that are available through Harvard University housing. Now, you're not required to live in Harvard University housing. You can certainly live in other types of accommodations in the area. The only thing that I would caution you about is, while the further out you go, the less expensive you may be able to find housing, you have to balance that against the proximity and the need to be close enough to campus to be able to readily participate in the program. So we certainly encourage you to try to minimize your living expenses whenever possible. Just make sure you're not living so far away that you can't fully participate in the program. So as you can see, we estimate that roughly it's around $3,000 a month. It's how much you're going to have to anticipate it's going to cost you to live. Again, you have some control over this. Some people can live on significantly less than this, depending upon how much they're paying for rent, how many roommates they have. Some people are going to find themselves wanting to live at a higher standard of living. You can do that, but bear in mind, if you do that, that's a cost you are going to personally bear. We're not able to assist you with any kind of assistance on our part, nor with loans to cover living expenses that are higher than what we allow for here. So bear that in mind. So when we talk about scholarship assistance, there is some funding available from Harvard Chan, but as you can see looking at this, it is limited. Unfortunately, the scholarship assistance is based upon the resources which the Harvard Chan School has. And so there's sometimes this misconception that Harvard, which has a large endowment, fully funds people. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way, because each school at Harvard has its own separate endowment. So for example, Harvard College for undergraduates has roughly half of the endowment, the full endowment of Harvard. So they are able to offer a funding opportunities, which is very much different from the opportunities that we have at Harvard Chan. The amount or the percentage of students who receive funding varies between about 30 and 50%. I would say on average, about 30% of students who are admitted and who apply for financial aid are we able to offer some assistance to. And that assistance in general ranges between about 25% to 50% of tuition. It's extremely rare to receive any more than that. It's not unheard of. For example, you can see under the MPH program, there are about 10 students who receive a what's called a presidential scholarship, which is full tuition, but that's 10 out of hundreds and hundreds of applicants. So it is extremely rare for students to receive more than between 25 to at most 50% of tuition. So when you're thinking about funding, there is scholarship money available, and we highly encourage you to apply, but just bear in mind it is unfortunately limited. Now, the DRPH program, Doctor of Public Health program, is a little different. That program has a specific funding structure where for those who show financial need, they cover 50% of your tuition or tuition for the first 2 years of the program. After the second year of the program, the tuition itself drops to about 50% of the original tuition, but the funding stops. So that's a different structure. But if you're applying for one of the master's programs, I would say you should estimate about a third of students are receiving some funding. In addition to the funding that's specific from the Harvard School of Public Health, there are some Harvard-wide scholarship opportunities that, depending upon your individual circumstances, you may be able to apply for. So there's the Zuckerman Fellowship, for example. This is specifically for domestic students who already have degrees or are doing joint programs in business, law, or medicine. So when I say already have degrees, I'm talking about graduate level degrees. So if you already have a medical degree, business degree, or law degree, the Zuckerman Fellowship is a great opportunity. It's very competitive, but students who receive the Zuckerman Fellowship, it's a full tuition and fees plus a stipend for living expenses. So that is a highly competitive but highly valuable fellowship opportunity to which to apply. The Commonwealth Fund is also available for physicians who are interested in minority health policy. And then there's this is sort of a slightly round hole, square peg type of situation, but there's what's called the FLAS Fellowship, which is Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship. It's a program that's done through the federal government, and it's for students who are also sort of studying a foreign language specific to their degree and sort of in a particular area, like they're planning to basically engage in research in particular areas of the world. It's hard to qualify for this program, but if you're interested, and we typically get 1 to 2 students a year who are funded through the FLAS program. And if you're interested, if you just Google Harvard and FLAS Fellowship, you'll find information about the eligibility criteria and how to apply. Now, for all of these funding opportunities, you have to be full-time students and you have to be full-time residential students. So if you're in the summer only, or the MPH EPI or Masters in Healthcare Management, et cetera, or in the part-time program, regretfully, you're not able to apply for these programs. You do have to be full-time. So in addition to opportunities from Harvard sources, we strongly encourage you to apply for any kind of external scholarship opportunities. Now, we do have on our financial aid website, we have an external scholarship database. I will caveat that by saying that we are currently in the process of redoing our website, and we are probably going to have to temporarily replace the database with a spreadsheet listing the different opportunities. But for now, if you go to our financial aid website, you will find an external searchable scholarship database, which we've created based upon funds that we've identified over time, either through our own research or because individual applicants in the past have received funding from one of those sources. So it's a bit of serendipity. It's not the sort of thing where I would say a large percentage of students receive funding here, but there are students who do identify external scholarship sources. So through the database or through your own research, or because you already know of an opportunity because of some type of activity in which you've engaged, there are students who are funding their programs through external funding. So we certainly encourage you to look for opportunities and to look as early as you can. Unfortunately, you may find that Some fellowship and scholarship opportunities require you to have already applied for admission or been admitted for admission, but you may find some opportunities that you can apply for now. So start early, be organized, and try to investigate as many opportunities as you can. So in addition to scholarship aid, there's also opportunities for borrowing loans and for student employment. So when it comes to borrowing loans, there's both federal loans and private loans. When it comes to federal loans, students can typically borrow up to $33,000 a year through the federal direct unsubsidized loan. Students who need to borrow more than that also have the opportunity to also borrow through the Grad Plus loan. Now, as you can see, the interest rates that are currently in effect, and we don't know what the interest rates for next year will be, but bear in mind that these rates are probably the rates for next year, unless the 10-year Treasury bill rate goes significantly down, because these rates are fixed based upon the 10-year Treasury bill rate, is pretty high. However, the advantages of federal loans is that they qualify for income-based repayment and potentially can qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And the way public service loan forgiveness works is if you work 10 years at full-time for a qualifying nonprofit or public sector employer while repaying your federal loans on an income-based repayment plan, the federal government will forgive what's ever left over on those loans at the end of 10 years. Just recently in the news, they announced that over 1 million people have now qualified for public service loan forgiveness. So it is a real program, and it's something that you very much do want to look into if you're planning to work for a nonprofit or a public sector employer. So in addition to federal loans, there's also what's called federal work study and teaching assistantships. So federal work study is for students who have financial need. And what it does is it subsidizes you to work either on campus for a nonprofit employer in the local area. And basically what it does is it reimburses employers for roughly 2/3 of the cost of the wages for the person who has work study. So it provides a significant incentive for people to hire somebody who has a work study award, because it will cost them significantly less. They can roughly hire 3 people for the cost of 1 person who doesn't have work study. So we certainly encourage students to receive work study, and if you're eligible, we will notify you about it on your application for when we determine your financial aid eligibility. There are students who also work as teaching assistants, research assistants. Now, this is a competitive process, and it's not a process you can apply for prior to being admitted. What will happen is, typically in the first semester of your enrollment, you will have the opportunity to apply. And there's going to be information you can find on, if you Google the School of Public Health teaching assistantships, you'll find a webpage that talks about all the specifics. Now, bear in mind, though, unlike at some public sector institutions where being a teaching assistant or research assistant comes with a waiver of tuition, that's not the way it works here. Here, you would get paid a salary. So you get paid an hourly rate. So you get a paycheck every week for the work you do, but does not come with tuition waivers. So it can certainly still be very valuable. It can help you with your living expenses. In addition, of course, it can help you with your professional development, but it's not going to waive your tuition. You can find more information about both teaching assistantship opportunities and work study by going to the link you'll see here on our website. So in addition, we definitely, when we mention the website, there's a lot of information out there we encourage you to take a look at. For now, it will talk about the application process and timelines. And we certainly encourage you to really investigate our website to ensure you understand sort of what the deadlines are and what the different opportunities are. Again, January 8th is going to be the deadline to apply. If you have not heard from us by the middle of December with a link on how to apply for financial aid, you should certainly reach out to us, because we can then regenerate the communication and send it to you with a link to how to apply for financial aid. And lastly, if you do have specific questions that we haven't answered here, you can certainly ask them during the session by putting your question in Q&A, and we will certainly try to answer your questions that you have. But you also have opportunities after this session to reach out to us. Probably the best way is by email. You can email us at financialaid@hsph.harvard.edu. Probably calling us by phone is not necessarily the quickest way to get a response. So I would encourage you to either email us, or you can schedule individual meetings by using the link you can see here on this page. The link is also available on our website under the Contact Us section of our financial aid website. And with that, I'm going to end this. And we will take questions that people have. So if Sinead and Salam, who I know both of you have been monitoring questions, if you want to let me know what has been asked, and anyone can
Yes.
try to jump in and answer.
All right, perfect. I know we've responded to some questions in the Q&A, but Michael, if you could verbally address it as well, would be great. Can you speak to for students who have a temporary protected status or students that are undocumented, deferred action for childhood arrivals if they are considered a domestic or an international student?
So neither really. So I'll give the good news first. The good news is if you are undocumented or DACA or temporary protected status, you are eligible to be considered for scholarship assistance. So you can complete the financial aid application. You have just as much opportunity as anyone else does to potentially receive scholarship aid. And scholarship assistance, when we look at that, we're looking at a combination of financial need, merit determined by the departments, and your background. And so you will have as much opportunity as anyone else for that. So that's the good news. The less good news is you aren't considered to be a domestic student for purposes of federal aid. So you can't get federal loans, you can't get work study. You could work as a course assistant, I think, but I can't speak definitively for that individual component. You may be able to borrow for some of the private loans. So on our financial aid website, through the Harvard Credit Union, we have a partnership with them. And I have seen students who have been either undocumented or in temporary refugee status who have been able to qualify to borrow from the Harvard Credit Union. Bear in mind, you would have the same eligibility as an international student in that case, which means the maximum you can borrow per year is $30,000 without a U.S. citizen cosigner. So there are limits to how much you can borrow, but there are some borrowing opportunities on that side.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that. What sort of general financial aid information is asked on the financial aid application? Are there any IE questions, for example, tax returns, bank statements, etc.? What sort of documents do they need ahead of time to complete the form?
So we're not going to, unless we have some reason to believe that the information you're providing us is not accurate, we don't require any kind of sort of tax statements or tax returns or bank statements, et cetera. That's not part of the application process. The financial aid application is actually very, very straightforward and shouldn't take more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes to complete. We're basically asking you for information on your current income, your current assets for you and your spouse if you're married. We have an opportunity where you can explain any special circumstances that you may have. So we have a section where you can explain anything that's unusual or extenuating that you don't think is clear from the strict income and asset information that we provide. We do also have a opportunity to complete, if you've gone through situations of extraordinary disadvantage, there is an opportunity to complete an essay. It's not mandatory, but an essay where we are able to potentially nominate people to a central university body who can potentially receive funding through a particular fellowship, which is very limited, but it's for people with very extenuating sort of extraordinary hardship and overcoming disadvantage. So you'll have the opportunity to do that. But basically, we're just looking for your current income and assets. That's all we need on the financial aid application.
Thank you, Michael. And I know the follow-up question we usually get from that is, my current income is not going to reflect what sort of resource I'm going to have as a student. So can you speak a little bit about how that's considered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are certainly aware of that, but that's also true of the vast majority of students who are attending. So when we are considering people's how financially needy they are, in some ways it's more of a comparative exercise where in essence we're saying, looking at everyone as they currently are, who has the highest financial need versus those who have less financial need. We realize that that's not going to be what your financial circumstances are going to be like when you're a student, but that's also going to be true of virtually everyone else who completes that financial aid application. So your relative financial need in comparison to other students is still going to be evident there. Now, again, there is a section for extenuating circumstances, and now it's not, or special circumstances. Now, just putting, I will not have this income when I'm a student is not special or extenuating. You're welcome to put that, and we're just going to ignore it because we know that. But you're welcome if it makes you feel better. If you want to add that under special circumstances, you are entirely welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
Just additional more clarification. I do have a follow-up question on that original question, which
Okay.
is what sort of assets are considered under the application?
Basically most assets with the exception of money in a retirement plan and if your primary home. So if you own your house, you don't have to report that. If you have money in retirement accounts, which is 401k, 403b, Roth IRAs. I'm sure I'm missing something out there when it comes to retirement plans, but basically if it's an official retirement plan, it doesn't have to report it. We do not look at parental income and assets, so we're just looking at the student's income and assets. But basically any kind of checking, savings, stocks, trusts, real estate, with the exception of your primary residence, all of those types do need to be reported. Individual partnerships, I'm sure there's many other types of financial devices that people have, but the general is if it's not your house and it's not a retirement plan, you need to report it.
Thank you for that. I think you answered the second portion of this question. But what does Harvard look at when assessing if a grad student demonstrates financial need, specifically for the DRPH program? And is it based on salary, savings, and retirement account?
Yeah, not retirement accounts, but it will be salary and savings when you apply. With the DRPH, I'd say over 90% of students do show financial need. So there certainly are some circumstances where someone has such a high level of income and assets that they may not qualify. And especially if it's assets. If it's current income, then that's something we look at. We look at less heavily than we look at assets when it comes to whether or not someone demonstrates financial need. But if you, for example, show that you have $1 million in the bank, you're not going to get funded under the DRPH program because you're just not going to show financial need. But if you think there's any reasonable prospect that you are going to demonstrate financial need, then you certainly are encouraged to complete the application.
Thank you, Michael. I know might be getting into the nitty-gritty of the answer of how the SIA or the EFC used to consider financial need. So if you have to define how financial need is demonstrated or calculated.
Yeah, we don't go into the specifics of how we assess it, but it's similar to the way the FAFSA works in the sense that we look at income and then we look at income and we look at assets, but then we subtract from that a percentage based upon the size of the household, the age of the individuals who are applying, because there's what's called income protection allowances and asset protection allowances. When it comes to the total contribution figure, we look to see how long the program is. So if we think you can contribute $50,000, but you're in a 2-year program, then we're going to say you can only contribute $25,000 per year. So there is a more complicated formula, but we don't provide the specifics of that. We're not in the position of wanting people to try to reverse engineer to answer questions to specifically. Students should be sort of open and honest about their income and assets. And now I will say I'd say the large percentage of people who apply for financial aid do demonstrate financial need. It's less common for people. It's not that there aren't people who have no financial need. There certainly are some, but most students do demonstrate financial need. Unfortunately, demonstrating financial need isn't going to be enough just by itself. There were hundreds of students who had, based on our calculations, zero ability to contribute to their educational costs that we were not able to offer scholarship aid to, unfortunately. So it's a combination of financial need, but then also merit as determined by the Office of Admissions and the departments and background of students based upon sort of financial. We look at sort of socioeconomic background of students to see whether or not they came from a background with significant income and assets and the ability of over time to amass savings and have a safety net when it comes to the ability to sort of absorb the cost of attending. So regretfully, we often have, every year we have lots of students who come back to us who are not able to offer funding to, and we will fully acknowledge they have 100% financial need, and yet we weren't able to offer them funding. It's just the reality of our funding situation.
Thank you, Michael. Another question we have is clarification. are the 25 to 50% scholarship that Harvard Chan provides to MPH students, is that only for tuition or is it for overall cost of attendance?
It's usually 25 to 50% of tuition, not of the full cost of attendance. Unfortunately, we have to make choices, and you have a choice of either offering fewer students larger awards or more students smaller awards. And as a general rule, we've tried to make the money go as far as we can to offer as many opportunities as we can. If we were to offer larger awards, we'd have to offer them to many fewer people. And then you would, instead of having 30 to 40% of students receiving funding, you might only have 20% of students or 15% of students receiving funding. So it's a struggle and a balancing act, unfortunately.
Thank you, Michael. We have one more question, and I encourage everyone to submit any questions that you have, but I'll let Salam read off the next few that come in.
So our next question is, does that function mean that if you have savings, you will likely not receive any aid?
Oh, no, there are plenty of students who have savings who do show financial need, because when we're looking at your savings, as I mentioned, we offset it if you have dependents, and we know that you have to have a certain amount of funds to pay for your dependents' expenses. So we will reduce the amount of your assets by the amount of your dependents. And then even after that, we look to see what we call an asset protection allowance, meaning we know that a certain amount of money needs to be set aside for people to cover emergency expenses, basically, because we don't want you to have no money in case you have some sort of emergency. And then, as we said, if you're in a more than a 1-year program, we're going to then divide that by the length of the program. So somebody who, for example, has $40,000 in assets and has no dependents, let's say, and let's say we subtract $10,000 as an emergency fund offset. So then that would be $30,000. Well, if the cost of attendance for a year is $105,000 and you have $30,000 in assets, you still show as having $70,000 in financial need. So you would still have significant financial need in a case like that. So just having some savings is not going to disqualify you. Now, if you have $1 million in savings, that's going to disqualify you. So it really is it's a relative term.
And our next question, we kind of touched on it a little bit, and it's regarding DRPH funding. Is there any funding specifically offered for the DRPH program?
Yes, I mean, unlike all the master's programs, the DRPH funding is very specific and is set upon a standardized model. So if a DRPH student demonstrates financial need, and as we said, over 90% do, then 50% of the tuition is covered for the first 2 years of the program. And that's the funding that students receive. Beginning in the 3rd year, the tuition level itself drops to 50%. So the net amount of tuition that a student pays in their 3rd year and subsequent years is the same as they paid in the 3rd year is the same as what they paid in the 1st and 2nd year. So it's a much more standardized amount for DRPH students, unlike the MPH programs where only, roughly 30%, but 30 to 40% might receive some funding, and the amount that they receive might vary student by student, but that's not true of DRPH.
And there isn't any, just a clarification, Michael. If, let's say, a student was wanting to get more than that 50% of the award, what is that process like? There's
no process for that. It's a standardized model. So if you're applying for the DRPH, you should expect that it would be 50% of tuition and fees. If there was any additional funding, it wouldn't be on a case-by-case basis. If we were to receive additional funding, it would be additional funding that would be provided to all admitted DRPH students, not on an individualized basis.
Thanks for that answer. And our last one, well, there could be more that are coming, but our next one is, will this webinar be recorded and made publicly accessible?
Yes, the webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be available on the admissions website. So the same website where you went in order to register to participate, it's going to be posted up there. I don't know how long it takes them to post it. I would say probably give it about a week, but it will be posted on the website. There's also, you'll find, if you go to that website, you'll find links to prior year presentations that we've done. So you're certainly welcome to look at those as well. We definitely still have time. We still have about another 25 minutes. So we will leave this open if there are more questions. I will continue to chatter on as we wait because why not? So let's see. What other things what are some other things that we know that people have asked us in the past? One thing, for example, when it comes to the FAFSA or when it comes to the financial aid application, people sometimes say, do I get preferential treatment if I apply early versus waiting till the deadline? So I'm going to answer that not quite straightforwardly, which is we think that there certainly is you're not going to get any specific benefit from applying early. On the other hand, if you wait so long that you don't get the financial aid application in by the deadline, there certainly is a disadvantage because you won't be considered if you don't apply by the deadline. And every year we do have a few students who the deadline comes and then they contact us panicky afterwards saying, I meant to apply, I started the application, but I didn't submit it, I was sick, there was something that happened. And unfortunately, often it's just impossible at that point for us to consider you because we will have already made our determinations. So I strongly, strongly encourage students to not wait to the last minute. I mean, I know it's human nature, but we see like over 70% of people seem to wait until the week prior to the deadline to apply. And it always makes me pull my hair out because it's like, why are people waiting this long? There is no need to wait this long. And it just means if anything unexpected happens in your life, you may miss it. So please, once you get that link from us to apply, please just sort of jump on it and get it submitted.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
sorry, I was just gonna add, just make sure that you are submitting. I know that happened a lot last year. We do not send out a confirmation email. So be sure to click submit. And like, if you're worried about like connection issues on your end or that you didn't submit it or anything like that, you can always reach out to us like by email just to confirm.
Well, actually, let me jump in on that though. That shouldn't be your first step.
No.
Because
Yeah.
Salam and Sinead will be the ones answering this, and
Yes.
I will speak for them to say we'd much rather answer questions when you can't self-service first. So on the MyFinaid website where you're going to submit the application, there is a section called documents, and so when the financial aid application has been submitted, it will say received. So you can always just get back into the website and check, and it says received, it's received, and it says not received, it's not received. So that's the first thing to do rather than
Yes.
immediately email us. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, you're completely right. Email us as the last step. If you're like, oh, I thought I submitted it a couple weeks ago, which is why it's good to do it early, and you check and you don't see that it's received, that's when like alarm bells should go off. But yes, first course of action, definitely check the status of the application first.
Yeah, and I think the timing also, just being cognizant of when you receive the application and when our deadline is a lot of holiday time. So we do acknowledge that it's not always the first thing that comes up, but just in terms, it does take, like Michael mentioned, 10 minutes tops will be 15. If you're pausing, you definitely can save as you go along. So certainly encourage you to submit the application as soon as you receive it. And then if you need to make any changes, you can always send us an email. But it's better to reach out to us before the deadline or on the deadline than afterwards.
And there are some quirky parts of the application that people can sometimes run into trouble with. For example, it tells you don't put in currency symbols in your answer, just put in whole numbers, but occasionally people will put in a currency symbol or put in a decimal point and it won't submit. So just read the instructions, follow the instructions, and you should be fine. But there are occasional quirks where people run into problems when trying to submit. So just bear that in mind. Now, I would say the reverse about like when not to worry. So when it comes to the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, just be aware there is not a direct connection between our systems and the FAFSA. So if you file the FAFSA, you're not going to immediately show as it being shown as received on our system. There is going to be a delay before that's going to actually be reflected. So as long as you get confirmation from the federal website that shows the FAFSA has been received and you see that you've sent it to us, meaning the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, then you can be reassured that it's fine. We do occasionally have people who accidentally send it to Harvard College, which is the undergraduate school. And if you do that, we're never going to receive it. Though, just for some reassurance, it doesn't affect your scholarship consideration. It just affects our ability to tell you about your federal aid eligibility. And there's no real reasonable limit on that. You know, regardless of when we get your FAFSA, we'll be able to package you for your federal eligibility. So if for any reason you're delayed on submitting the FAFSA, or you realize accidentally you sent it to the wrong school and not to us, that's not the end of the world. You can just go back onto the site, add us. All it means is we may have a little bit of delay on getting you your federal eligibility information, but it's not the end of the world. But don't think that I filed the FAFSA and then you go to our MyFinAid portal and you don't immediately see it's being received. That's normal. So don't worry about that.
Thanks, Michael. And I think the great news on that is recently FAFSA made updates where you can track the status of your FAFSA submission. So there is that as another point of confirmation, but always definitely reach out to our office and we can confirm whatever stage your FAFSA is currently in. But speaking of FAFSA, if I can ask this question ahead of the one that we have, does a student have to indicate their SSN anywhere on SOFAS application for us to match it to their FAFSA application?
Yes, you do. I do know that some people are concerned about filing a FAFSA, their social security number, but unfortunately, if you don't do that, there's nothing to connect that FAFSA when it comes in to your record. And so you do need to make sure that when you complete that SOFAS application, you do list your social security number. I mean, every year we'll have cases where people make a mistake on their social security number on the SOFAS application. And then we end up having to do some sort of investigation and then reach out to the student and say, hey, this doesn't seem to match the FAFSA we received. And it takes a while. So yes, you should put your FAFSA on your social security number on the SOFAS application, and you should double check before you press submit that you haven't like transposed a couple of digits.
We have another question, and this one's about spouses. So if an individual is married, will their financial standing be automatically considered as a married couple, or can they be considered on an individual basis?
We're going to look at both you and your spouse's combined income and assets. We are going to expect that both, even if the spouse is not directly contributing to your educational costs, you are going to be sharing living expenses. You are going to be having, you're going to be having a shared responsibility for expenses, which is going to therefore increase the resources you have available for your educational costs. Now, there can be some unusual circumstances like a married couple who are living separately and so are maintaining two households, so there may, or a situation where both students are in school at the same time. So certainly in the special circumstances section of the financial aid application, we certainly encourage you to explain if there's something unusual. But we are, by default, we are certainly going to be looking at both you and your spouse's income and assets when determining your financial need.
Thank you for that answer, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
This is something we're used to seeing. So if we are currently an international student with a pending green card application, we will be able to be considered for federal loans once we become permanent residents, even if midway through the academic year or program.
Yep, that happens, as Sinead was saying, it happens pretty commonly. So certainly that's not a problem. And the good news is, since both domestic and international students are equally eligible for scholarship aid from us, it's not, the change in status isn't going to have any impact in that regard. And whenever your permanent residency status is granted, you're then, as long as you're still in the academic year, you can then submit a FAFSA, get federal loan eligibility. Obviously, if you get it in May of your in May and you're graduating in May, it's kind of moot. But if you're still enrolled in the program, then that's fine. You can qualify to borrow.
Yeah, and one other, I think, point of timing where it matters is when, as an international student, when you have to do your visa application process, right? Where what your funding options that might be available will be different. But I'll let Michael speak more to that.
Yeah, that can be tricky for you, because if you are still an international student at the time that you've been admitted and you need to pay your deposit and enroll, in order to get your visa, even if you expect to become a permanent resident later, you're still going to have to get a visa, which means you're still going to have to show enough funding from whatever sources you have sufficient to cover the cost of attendance. And you're not going to be able to basically certify based upon the idea that you are in the future going to be eligible for federal aid. So you're going to have to show through your own savings or loan borrowing, private loan borrowing or scholarship opportunities that you have enough to cover that cost of attendance. Now, if you, for example, certified that and then later become eligible for federal loans and all that, then that's fine. I mean, you're not going to be disadvantaged. It's not, let's say, for example, you pay in September for the fall semester using personal resources. You can then receive a federal loan later once you qualify and reimburse yourself for the money you paid out in order to pay for those original expenses. But yes, the visa, you'd still have to have the funding available at the front end in order to apply. We have a separate session for international students tomorrow, so I won't go into a lot of detail about visas, but I will say that you do have to have all those funds up front. Occasionally people ask saying, well, can I just certify just for the first semester now and certify later for the spring semester? No, you need to show you have the entire first year's cost of attendance available in order to get your visa.
Thank you, Michael. We have, I think, a few questions, a couple that are admissions related, but let's see what we can do. Which section of SOFAS in the SOFAS application will they indicate their SSN? I'm imagining they're asking for the SOFAS because this was a question follow-up as it
Yeah.
relates to the SOFAS question.
You'd have to check the actual application itself. I mean, it's in the demographic biographical information section. It is asked to all people. It says, do you have a social security number? And then it gives you the opportunity to address it. But I cannot speak specifically for where on the application it falls. But we get it for thousands of applicants. And so I do know it's on there.
Yes, no, it certainly is, but I don't know if it's a required field. You
No,
may
no,
not
it's still
have to,
No, it is not.
provide.
Yeah, it's not required because it's not mandatory to submit it.
Right.
Like if you were somebody who had no interest in getting federal aid and you don't plan to file the FAFSA, you're not required to submit it. But
Yes.
if you don't submit it and you do plan to, it will create problems.
Yeah, so just as another point is to say, if you don't want to provide the SSN on the SOFAS application, you don't have to. When we receive your FAFSA, we will receive your SSN that way. So just in case you're thinking we need to match it in some ways, but
Well,
that's another.
Yeah, but we kind of do. If they don't submit it on the SOFAS, then there won't be anything to match in our system. So they kind of do need to submit it. I would say if you do plan to file the FAFSA, submit the social security number. We're going to get it anyway through the FAFSA, so you
That's true.
will submit it through the SOFAS application.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then here is another question, which is admission specific, but are students able to defer admissions for a year if they decide it's not financially possible to attend this year, but could be the following year?
So that separate second part of the statement is going to be, my answer is going to be no. So basically there are circumstances where the admissions office will allow for a deferment, and that decision is made by the Office of Admissions. So you need to reach out to them. However, they explicitly say that one of the reasons that they do not grant a deferment is because of financial issues. They only grant deferments for reasons of something that was unexpected or unknown that's typically associated with either a personal crisis or a job opportunity. So if something happened that you weren't expecting when you originally applied, but the fact that you don't have enough funding to attend is not normally a reason to grant a deferment, and they would typically then instruct you to reapply for admission in a subsequent year if that was the case. And I will say, if you were to reapply for admission, or if you were to defer, you do have for reasons other than financial, because again, they typically will not grant it for financial reasons, but if for reasons other than financial, there is the opportunity to reapply for financial aid in the subsequent year. But again, since funding is only roughly about a third of the people who are admitted receive funding, if you didn't receive funding the first year, there's a very good chance you're still not going to receive funding in a subsequent year, just because of the percentage of who we're able to fund.
Thank you for that. We currently do not have any open questions. And I know we're wrapping up in the last 10 minutes of our session. So if there are any last minute burning questions you guys have, or any information you're wanting to know as you're preparing for your financial aid application submission coming soon, you definitely know how to reach us, but certainly feel free to ask now.
I mean, I'm always willing to stay full forever, as people know, but we certainly do, as Sinead was saying, we do have opportunities for you to reach out separately, either through a Zoom appointment using our Calendly function or by email. The one type of question we're not going to be able to answer, just to be aware, and we do get people who contact us and they will contact us and say, what is the chances that I will receive financial aid? We are not going to be able to give you any kind of assessment or estimate of your likelihood of receiving financial aid prior to actually going through the process of applying and being considered and being admitted and being reviewed as part of that process. So please don't reach out to us and say, what is the chances that I in particular am going to get funding? Because we're just going to have to tell you, unfortunately, we have no idea. And you're just going to have to apply to find out.
Yeah, and I think as a last topic or parting, certainly encourage you highly to explore external funding sources. There are many scholarship opportunities that, you know, have deadlines such as the Fulbright or any of these major funding opportunities that you would find out or even are happening at this time. So in order not to miss out on any opportunities that you might be eligible for, it's better to start, if you haven't already, on your external search journey and to utilize the many search engines that are on our website and as well as the external Excel sheet. Is best, we recommend you download it now, as our school is going through a school-wide website redesign that we do not know what the your navigational or access to that resource will look like. Obviously, we will still have the Excel sheet available to you in some type of form, but we definitely encourage you to download that, go through that list and see which ones you qualify for and apply to as many as you possibly can. Just because, as Michael mentioned, even for those students that we do fund, we're not able to give them 100% funding. So it's always best to supplement your funding through other means. And we do get a lot of questions surrounding external funding sources. So we encourage you highly to utilize the resources that we have. And I'm sure Michael may have mentioned it earlier, which is that we are not able to provide individualized advice on which sort of funding that you would be eligible for, only because the unique nature of how individualistic the funding search is.
Yeah, people sometimes ask us, it's like, oh, can you tell me the 10 external scholarships that I should apply for? And we're like, we can't, because everyone's going to be different. And all we can say is whenever we identify a source, we add it to that external scholarship database. And so that means if it's there, we believe it's a legitimate live opportunity, but we can't point you to any specific source and say this particular one is the one we'd recommend you apply to.
Yeah, certainly. And I know Salam might be working on sharing a screen sharing of how to contact us page. Just the various ways you can reach out to us is you can send us an email, that's preferred over a phone call. But you can also make individualized appointments with any of us if you have just a specific question about your program and the application process as well as funding.
Yeah, here is the link again, the page that shows the contact, our financial aid email address, our phone number, though again, especially because we've been getting a ton of spam calls recently. Phone is not the ideal way to reach out to us, but you can. But email, and by scheduling a link through our Calendly link, you can do a Zoom appointment with us on an individual basis. So there are different ways you can reach out. All right, well, with that, I'm going to call it. And thank you all very much for participating. We are glad you did, and we certainly recommend and encourage you to reach out if you have any additional questions.